Childhood traumas start with the parents and the way they talk to their children, especially children who have something called ADHD. It's a problem with attention disorder. And what happens is that we don't understand that, we don't read a lot, we tend to make it worse. This child truly is born with a slight delay. At their same age, they're just not as attentive as others their age. Now, how do I know this? I'm not a psychologist, alhamdulillah. I may be talking like I am, but I'm not. However, alhamdulillah, I've been a teacher for about 20 years and in well-being and counseling for teenagers. So I've learned along the way, working with psychologists and having experience in this area, reading a lot, doing a lot of workshops in this area, we've come, alhamdulillah, to know all these new names. And in the beginning, I thought they weren't even real. Just pray to Allah and it's the shaitan. But in the end, I thought, no, they are real. We've had two experiences with students. And subhanAllah, I changed my approach in my classroom teaching. Alhamdulillah, it worked. One of the first things we're taught, a good teacher, is do not jump to assumptions about your students. Same with your children. Do not jump to assumptions about your children. And don't compare your children to your other children. No child experiences the same upbringing as their sibling. A brother who is the oldest does not have the same experience as the brother who is second, or the youngest, or the middle child, or the girl. It's like each one had their own family. Literally, if you have 5 children, they had 5 different families. The older child is treated different to the youngest one. The youngest one is spoiled. Everything is cute. The older one, there's a bit more responsibility. And the middle one is usually neglected. And then we come to treat each one of them with the same consequence and the same words. It's very hard to parent, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives us for our shortcoming. But we do need to read more about parenting and these new names. So you have a child, for example, who is diagnosed with ADHD. Now, before I say something, one thing I tell my young brothers and sisters, my dear, and I'm old enough to be your father for some of you, my dear son, my dear daughter, my dear brother, my dear sister, never, ever, ever, remember this, never, ever self-diagnose. Don't diagnose yourself as if you're your psychologist. Just because you had a bit of anxiety or a bit of depression or a bit of your chest was a little bit constricted does not mean you are sick. The moment you diagnose yourself, you create a sickness. For a person to be that, you need to be professionally diagnosed. It has to be extreme, major depression, major anxiety, major trauma. Just because, we've been through traumas before, it does not mean necessarily you have post-traumatic stress disorder. It takes a lot to get there. It takes a lot. In fact, the psychologists have created criteria. And you know what? Ibn al-Razi and Ibn Sina, the great scholars I told you about of Islam, they actually had these criteria all set up. And they use them today. They just didn't know where it came from. But they built on them. Criteria that, for example, for a person to be diagnosed with a mental illness, they have to have a quantity, a number of things that are all happening intensely at the same time. I think some of them they have, for example, so let's say, for example, for ADHD or depression, they have like 9 things. 7 out of those 9, or maybe I've got the numbers wrong, but let's just say 9. 7 out of those 9, so the majority of them, they're intense, each one of them is intense, and they're frequent and consistent. So just if you had 1 or 2 traits doesn't mean you're mentally ill, brother and sister. Take it easy on yourself and don't make yourself sick unnecessarily. And it has to continue consistently for at least 6 months, consistently. And it leads to debilitation. You can't shower, you can't go to your work, you no longer move, you can't get out of your bed, you no longer do the things you are interested in. All of that, it's intense. If a person does get to that, it has to be diagnosed. So when we speak to our children, they might have ADHD, they might have this or they might have that. For example, if you don't know what that is, you might say really bad things to your child, and your child cannot process it. For example, you always don't do this. You're always messy. You are rude. You're always cutting me off. How many times have I told you not to cut me off? But you see that your child's consistently doing it. It means you just have to change your approach. Even if you don't know that it's ADHD or whatever it is. Maybe it's not. But change your approach. Don't keep doing the same old thing over and over again. And you don't have to know psychology to do that. You just have to read a little bit about the seerah, the biography of the Prophet ﷺ. A young man came to the Prophet ﷺ in front of everybody. He cut everyone off and brought the attention to himself. Walks in, barges in, says, Ya Rasulullah, allow me to commit zina. Let me fornicate. Please, let me fornicate. I can't handle it anymore. He cut people off, came in and asked abruptly, and asked the Messenger about the worst thing. One of the worst things. Let me fornicate, knowing that it's haram. major sin. Now everyone around did the typical thing that we all do. They frowned at him, they were angry. If it wasn't for the Messenger ﷺ being there, they were all going to jump him. And his family who were there as well. How dare you? Where's your shame? Now, a person, he could have had something like ADHD, I don't know. But how did the Prophet ﷺ deal with it? He stayed calm. Rasul ﷺ told him words that the guy felt that he was validated for his feelings, that he's frustrated. He can't help it. Rasul ﷺ said, sit. Sat down, calmed him down and said, what you're asking me for, would you like it for your mother? Would you like me to tell your mother she can do the same thing? He said, Na'udhu billah, ya Rasulullah. So what about your sister? If she came to me and asked me, would you like me to tell your sister she can do the same thing? He said, no, ya Rasulullah. He said, what about your auntie? And he started to bring it so close to home that he became disgusted with himself. And then he said, well, if I allow you, it means I'm allowing someone else's sister like your sister to do the same with you, or some other mother like your mother to do the same with you. That's what I'm doing. But the way Rasulullah ﷺ approached him was more important than the things he said. Do you understand? And he could listen. He said, Wallahi, I never saw anybody speak in such compassion like Rasulullah ﷺ. Another example, a man was an alcoholic. He had an addiction. I forgot his name. It could have been, Allahu A'lam, forgive me, Ya Allah, but it could have been someone like a Nu'ayman. These are the names that come to me, or Abu Jundub. And most companions used to drink a lot of alcohol before Islam. So this young man, he came to Rasulullah ﷺ, he was an alcoholic, he couldn't leave it. He fasted, he prayed, he did jihad, he did everything. But every time he'd come back and say, Ya Rasulullah, whip me, punish me for the consequence. Obviously, punishing is to deter. And it was light whips. He said, punish you so the sin can go away. So he kept on coming a lot to the Prophet ﷺ. Every time. Hey Rasulullah, Ya Rasulullah ﷺ, I've done it again, I drank again. Purify me, purify me, purify me. One day, one of the companions said, has he no shame, always coming to the Prophet, peace be upon him, like this? The Prophet ﷺ stopped him. He says, don't say that about him. Wallahi inni la'a'lam wa annahu yuhibbu Allah wa rasulah. Wallahi, I know that he loves Allah and his messenger. Now, Rasul ﷺ could have said, yes, you're right. He could have turned to the man and said, aren't you shameful? If you love Allah and his messenger, why would you come back? Rasul ﷺ could have said all that. And he would have been in the right to say that. It's the truth. He wouldn't have wronged him by saying that. You know, like what some of us do. Well, it's the truth. Sorry, that's how it is. That's how I am. No. If you want to help, especially your family and children, learn from the Prophet ﷺ. Instead, he went the other way. He treated him the way that the man will listen and help him. Give him time. The only reason he's coming to be whipped is because he doesn't like what he's doing. It's because he loves Allah and his messenger that he's coming here. The other way around, there's two ways to look at it. Anyway, time went on and the story is long, and he ended up leaving alcohol because after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, the Amir, I think it was Assaad ibn Abi Waqqas radiallahu anhu, he saw him so chivalrous in a battle, and he told him, I will never punish you for alcohol. And he said, as for I will never drink alcohol again, because the only reason I drank alcohol is because there was a way out by being punished and my sin is gone. But now because there's no way out, I got no way of the sin going away, I can't drink alcohol anymore.